In the sun-drenched waters of the Gulf of California, on a forgotten island where seabirds outnumber people, Elena and Marco Vega run a humble fishing operation far from the world's attention. But when a fleet of unmarked boats appears on the horizon carrying Los Halcones cartel enforcers with military-grade weapons and a single photograph, Elena Vega, their carefully constructed life crumbles. No one suspects the woman who mends fishing nets each morning once commanded elite DEA tactical teams, or that her quiet, weathered husband previously served as one of the most decorated Delta Force operatives in Afghanistan. Now, with their past converging on their sanctuary, Elena and Marco must resurrect the lethal skills they had hoped to leave behind. Morning breaks over Isla Serena like liquid gold, sunlight cascading across azure waters that lap gently against the island's eastern shore. Elena Vega emerges from a modest cabin perched on rocky cliffs, her dark hair swept into a practical braid. At 42, her face carries the weathered dignity of someone intimately acquainted with both sun and sea. Lines at the corners of her eyes speak to years squinting across bright waters rather than peering through rifle scopes at distant targets, or so the local fishermen believe. She stretches, unconsciously scanning the horizon in a sweeping arc, south to north, then back again, before collecting empty traps from the porch. Nothing about this systematic surveillance betrays that Elena is following protocols ingrained during 15 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration's Special Operations Division, where she'd led teams into cartel strongholds across Central and South America. To anyone watching, she's simply a fisherman's wife preparing for another day's work. Marco appears in the doorway behind her, salt and pepper beard framing a face handsome despite, or perhaps because of, the scar that runs along his jawline. Folk in the nearest coastal village whisper it came from a fishing accident years ago. In truth, it was a knife wielded by a Taliban commander in the mountains of Kunar province. At 45, Marco moves with the quiet economy of someone who understands exactly how much energy each motion requires, a habit formed during years of recon missions where every unnecessary movement could mean death. Tide's coming in early, he observes, accepting a mug of coffee from Elena. His calm statement contains layers of meaning between them, an acknowledgement that weather patterns are shifting, bringing unexpected variations to their carefully monitored environment. It's the same tone he once used to alert his Delta team to approaching hostiles without alarming nearby civilians. Elena nods. I noticed we should check the northern nets first. Their conversation sounds mundane to anyone who might overhear, but these daily exchanges serve as security briefings, opportunities to share observations about anything unusual in their self-imposed exile. 5 years they've lived this way, building a reputation as hard-working private people who supply the freshest catch to restaurants along the Baja coast. The couple moves toward their weathered fishing boat, La Esperanza, which bobs gently against the small wooden dock extending from their private beach. Despite its worn appearance, the vessel conceals reinforced hulls and an engine significantly more powerful than required for simple fishing runs. Marco checks the fuel lines and navigation systems with the same methodical precision he once applied to pre-mission equipment inspections. Elena loads their gear with practiced efficiency, nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. Beneath stacked traps and coiled nets lies a concealed compartment containing emergency provisions, satellite phone, first aid supplies, and other resources they hope never to use. The compartment's design makes it appear as solid decking to anyone not knowing exactly where to press. Manuel said there's been increased patrol boat activity near the islands, Marco mentions casually as he unties the mooring rope. Manuel, their occasional deckhand from the mainland, serves as their unwitting intelligence source, sharing gossip and observations from coastal communities. Elena considers this information as she settles behind the wheel. Fishing season brings all types, she responds, her tone deliberately light while her mind calculates potential threats. The Mexican Navy regularly patrols these waters, but changes in pattern could indicate something else, perhaps authorities responding to increased cartel movements. They navigate away from their island, engines purring as La Esperanza cuts through gentle swells. The surrounding sea stretches in every direction, a brilliant blue canvas dotted with distant islands rising like green-topped sentinels from the water. This isolated archipelago provides the perfect backdrop for people wishing to disappear. For the next several hours, they work in seamless coordination, checking nets and traps with the synchronicity that comes from years operating as partners. In different contexts, when local fishermen encounter them, they see only a husband and wife singularly attuned to the rhythms of the sea, not former elite operatives who once tracked the very cartels that control much of the surrounding coastline. By midday, they anchor in a protected cove on the island's far side, sharing a simple lunch of bread, local cheese, and fresh fruit. Elena's gaze periodically sweeps their surroundings in unconscious threat assessment, while Marco disassembles and cleans their fishing gear with the same careful attention he once gave to field stripping weapons. "I think I'll check the weather station when we get back," Marco says, which Elena understands as his intention to review their surveillance feeds. The weather station is their euphemism for sophisticated monitoring equipment disguised as meteorological instruments on their cabin roof. "Good idea. I noticed some unusual cloud formations earlier," she replies, indicating she's also sensed something requiring investigation. The afternoon proceeds without incident as they navigate to additional fishing grounds. Elena skillfully pilots around submerged rock formations that would tear through the hull of vessels operated by less experienced captains. Her intimate knowledge of these waters came through painstaking exploration and mapping during their first year, applying the same thorough approach she once used when planning raids in unfamiliar territory. As sunlight fades into amber and crimson, streaks across the western sky, they return to their island. From a distance, their cabin looks unremarkable, a simple structure of weathered wood and corrugated metal with solar panels that power modest needs. Its strategic position atop coastal bluffs, however, offers unobstructed views in all directions, eliminating any approach angles outside their visual control. Marco secures the boat while Elena begins unloading their catch into insulated containers for tomorrow's mainland delivery. The practiced routine masks their heightened awareness of everything around them, from shifting wind patterns to the behavior of seabirds wheeling overhead. Inside their cabin, simplicity serves as both cover and tactical advantage. Minimal furnishings eliminate hiding places for potential intruders. Every window provides clear sightlines to exterior approaches. What appears to casual visitors as rustic minimalism is actually a carefully constructed defensive position. Elena prepares dinner while Marco retrieves a laptop from behind a false panel in their kitchen cabinets. He connects it to hardwired security feeds and begins reviewing the day's recordings. Nothing appears unusual until he reaches footage from late morning, a plane flying significantly lower than regular commercial routes, making 2 passes over the southern archipelago. "Elena," he says quietly. She joins him, knife still in hand, her posture shifting subtly to something more alert, more dangerous. The footage shows a twin-engine aircraft with no visible identification marking a search pattern. "Reconnaissance," she murmurs. "It's the type of aerial survey that precedes operations, something they're both intimately familiar with from opposite sides of the law enforcement equation." Marco enters commands that enhance the image, revealing details of the aircraft. "Not military or Coast Guard," he concludes. "Private charter, but flying military patterns." They exchange glances laden with unspoken understanding. After 5 years of peace, they're facing the first concrete sign that someone might be searching. For them, or at least exploring their territory with unusual interest. "Could be smugglers mapping new routes," Elena offers, though her tone lacks conviction. "Maybe," Marco concedes, though they both recognize the coincidence would be too convenient. He accesses their security archive, comparing today's footage with historical patterns. "I'll set the motion detectors to highest sensitivity tonight." As darkness envelops their island sanctuary, they complete evening routines that, to outsiders, would appear ordinary, securing doors, banking the cooking fire, preparing for bed. What remains invisible are the extra precautions, checking defensive positions, confirming emergency communications are operational, mentally rehearsing evacuation procedures developed years ago. In their bedroom, beneath the mattress, lies a sealed waterproof container, their last resort package containing new identities, emergency currency, and coordinates for another safe location should this one be compromised. They've never needed it, but its presence provides a measure of security. Elena stands at their bedroom window, gazing across moonlit waters that shimmer like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The beauty still moves her, even after years in this place, even with renewed concerns stirring in her mind. "We knew this might happen eventually," Marco says, joining her at the window. His arm slides around her waist in a gesture simultaneously affectionate and protective. "Yes," she acknowledges, "but we've prepared. If someone's looking, they won't find what they expect." The statement hangs between them, a recognition of their dual nature as both prey and predators. If threatened, these seemingly simple fishers would transform into something far more dangerous than any pursuers might anticipate. They retire to bed, but sleep comes lightly. Both rest with the practiced ability of those accustomed to danger, alert even in slumber, ready to transition instantly from sleep to deadly action if necessary. Their weapons remain within reach. Elena's customized tactical knife beneath her pillow, Marco's 9mm pistol in the nightstand's false bottom, insurance policies against nightmare scenarios. For tonight at least, Isla Serena remains their peaceful haven. But beneath this tranquility, preparations have begun for a storm they've always known might eventually find them. The consequences of lives spent fighting against powerful enemies who never truly forget or forgive. The approaching Threat 3. Days pass with no further unusual activity. The mysterious aircraft doesn't return, and Elena and Marco maintain their routine while increasing vigilance. Each morning they check their surveillance equipment before heading out on La Esperanza. And each evening, they review footage meticulously, searching for anything out of place in their isolated domain. On the fourth morning, Elena wakes before dawn. Something has disturbed her sleep, not a sound, but rather its absence. The constant symphony of waves against rock, seabirds calling, and wind through palm fronds has fallen unnaturally quiet. She slides from bed without waking Marco, her movements fluid and silent as she approaches the window. The sea lies unnaturally still, reflecting the fading stars like a perfect mirror. No breeze disturbs the surface. In her experience, such stillness often precedes significant weather changes or trouble. Elena's instincts, honed through years of high-risk operations, prickle with warning. She dresses quickly in fishing clothes that conceal how easily they allow for movement in a confrontation. The cargo pants have reinforced knees for crawling across rough terrain. The light jacket's numerous pockets can hold essential tools or improvised weapons. Everything appears utilitarian rather than tactical. Stepping onto the porch, Elena performs her habitual horizon scan. In the pre-dawn gloom, visibility extends only a few hundred yards offshore. Something flickers at the edge of perception, a momentary reflection where none should exist. She freezes, focusing on that spot, but sees nothing further. Behind her, the cabin door opens. Marco joins her, rifle casually held at his side. To anyone watching, it would appear he's preparing to hunt island rabbits for their dinner. A common enough activity, but Marco never carries the hunting rifle unless he's sensed potential danger. Motor oil in the air, he murmurs, nostrils flaring slightly. Elena nods. She's caught it too. The faint petroleum scent that doesn't belong in their pristine environment. Someone has passed nearby with a vessel, recently enough that the smell lingers. Could be poachers, she suggests, maintaining their practice of considering innocent explanations first. Could be, Marco agrees, though his tone suggests he finds it unlikely. I'll check the Western cameras. He disappears inside while Elena continues her survey, moving toward their dock with deliberate casualness. She inspects La Esperanza, confirming. Nothing has been disturbed overnight. No tracking devices attached to the hull, no signs of tampering with the engine or fuel lines. When she returns to the cabin, Marco has connected their security feeds to the main screen. He silently indicates a recording time-stamped 3:17 a.m. The night vision footage shows a sleek vessel with outboard motors passing their island at reduced speed, running without navigation lights. Illegal and suspicious behavior this close to shore. Military-grade hull design, Marco observes, enhancing the image. But no official markings. Elena studies the footage. That's a Midnight Express intercept model, Cartel favorite for drug runs because they outrun Coast Guard vessels. Two men visible on deck, Marco continues, advancing the footage frame by frame. Professional posture, scanning shorelines methodically. Not smugglers then, Elena concludes. They'd avoid islands entirely, stay to deep channels. These men are searching. The implied question hangs between them. Searching for what, or whom? Marco checks their other cameras, confirming the boat circled their entire island before continuing southward. Reconnaissance, he says finally. First the aircraft, now this. Someone's mapping the archipelago systematically. Elena's mind races through possibilities. Their identities have remained secure for 5 years. New names, extensive physical changes, and meticulously crafted backstories that have withstood casual scrutiny from local authorities and neighbors. Their former agencies believe them dead, killed in a raid gone wrong near the Guatemala border. They've been careful, patient, invisible. We should move up tomorrow's supply run, she decides. Test the waters, see if there's any unusual activity. At Puerto Marquez, Marco nods. Their scheduled visit to the mainland port isn't for another 2 days, but adjusting their routine might reveal whether they're under specific surveillance. If someone is watching them, changes to established patterns often force observers to reposition, potentially exposing themselves. They spend the morning in heightened readiness, completing chores with mechanical efficiency while their minds calculate threat assessments and contingencies. By mid-morning, they've loaded La Esperanza with yesterday's catch and documentation for an unscheduled delivery. Take the southern route, Elena suggests, as Marco starts the engines. Past Isla Ventura. He understands immediately. She wants to determine if the mystery boat might be anchored among the uninhabited islands to their south. The slight detour would appear logical to anyone monitoring their movements. Fishermen often adjust routes based on weather and sea conditions. They navigate through crystal waters, maintaining the unhurried pace of people with nothing to hide. Elena steers, while Marco uses binoculars to scan distant shores and coves, his posture suggesting he's searching for fish movements rather than surveillance positions. An hour into their journey, they pass the western shore of Isla Ventura. Marco tenses slightly, lowering his binoculars. 12 o'clock, half-mile out, behind the rock formation. Elena adjusts course slightly, as though avoiding shallow reefs. This minor course correction gives her clear sightlines to the location Marco indicated. The boat from their security footage sits anchored in a sheltered cove, partially concealed by overhanging vegetation. 2 men move on deck, one cleaning equipment while another monitors sophisticated communication gear, not standard equipment for fishermen or even typical smugglers. "Keep going," Marco murmurs. "Don't give any indication we've spotted them." Elena maintains their course and speed, her expression betraying nothing as they continue past the island. When they're safely beyond visual range, she exchanges a meaningful glance with Marco. "Professional setup," she observes, "not just passing through." Marco nods grimly. "That's an observation post. Question is, what are they observing? The shipping channels? Or us specifically? It's the crucial distinction that will determine their next moves. Cartels regularly monitor maritime traffic for opportunity and threats. If this is routine surveillance, Elena and Marco might avoid scrutiny by maintaining their innocent fisherman cover. If they're the specific targets, different measures become necessary. They reach Puerto Marquez by early afternoon. The small harbor bustles with activity. Fishing vessels unloading their catch, merchants selling supplies, tourists exploring the colorful waterfront. Elena and Marco dock at their usual spot, nodding greetings to familiar faces as they unload their containers. "You're early this week," remarks Cesar, the weather dock manager who schedules deliveries to local restaurants. "Good catch? Thought a storm might be coming," Marco explains casually. "Decided to beat the weather." Cesar glances at the cloudless sky with skepticism, but doesn't press the issue. He helps them unload, commenting on the quality of their fish, while updating them on local prices and demand. While Marco handles the business transaction, Elena wanders toward the harbor master's office, ostensibly to check weather reports posted on the public bulletin board. In reality, she's scanning for unfamiliar faces, showing too much interest in their arrival. The usual harbor crowd mills about. Fishermen, shopkeepers, tourists, no one pays them undue attention. Then, as she turns back toward the dock, Elena notices a man seated at an outdoor cafe across the street. Unlike the relaxed tourists around him, he maintains perfect posture, his gaze systematically covering the harbor in a pattern she recognizes immediately. Security sweep, the kind taught to professional protection details and surveillance teams. The man is approximately 35, with close-cropped hair and the muscular build of someone who trains regularly. His casual clothing doesn't quite conceal the outline of a shoulder holster. When his gaze passes over her, Elena pretends to study a posted notice, allowing only her peripheral vision to track him. He speaks briefly into what appears to be a standard cell phone, but his mouth barely moves. The economical communication, the style of someone using a throat microphone connected to a professional radio system. Elena returns to Marco, brushing his arm in a seemingly affectionate gesture that signals trouble. "We have company," she murmurs. Café Azul, single male, armed, running comms. Marco doesn't turn to look. Instead, he continues arranging payment with Caesar, his demeanor unchanged. Description? Elena provides details in fragmented sentences between comments about their catch, making the exchange appear like ordinary conversation. Marco processes this information while maintaining his focus on business. "We'll need supplies before heading back," he tells Caesar, loud enough for anyone listening. "Probably stay in port until tomorrow morning." This declared intention, different from their usual pattern of returning to their island the same day, is a strategic move. If they're under surveillance, announcing an overnight stay might cause watchers to relax slightly, creating opportunities to detect or evade them. After finishing with Caesar, they visit several supply shops, purchasing items. Any fishing operation would require fuel, preserved food, equipment parts. Throughout these errands, they maintain constant awareness of their surroundings, noting the armed man has been joined by a second individual with similar bearing and alert posture. "They're not Cartel street soldiers," Elena observes quietly, as they load supplies into La Esperanza. Too disciplined, too controlled. These are professionals. Marco secures a fuel can. Specialized team then. Question is, which cartel? And why now, after all this time? The harbor begins quieting as evening approaches. Following their announced plan, Elena and Marco visit a small restaurant frequented by local fishermen. They order seafood stew and cold beer, participating in casual conversation with regulars while maintaining awareness of the two men now stationed at opposite ends of the harbor, monitoring all approaches to their docked vessel. As darkness falls, harbor lights illuminate the waterfront. Elena excuses herself to use the restaurant's bathroom, but instead slips out the back door into an alley. Moving with practiced stealth, she navigates between buildings until she reaches a vantage point overlooking the main dock where La Esperanza is moored. A third man now examines their vessel, his movements suggesting he's searching for something specific. He inspects the hull, checks storage compartments, and examines their navigation equipment with professional thoroughness. Elena memorizes his features, noting the distinctive scorpion tattoo visible on his forearm when he reaches into tight spaces, a marking associated with Los Halcones, one of Mexico's most violent cartels. She returns to the restaurant through a different route, sliding back into her seat beside Marco. Under the table, she squeezes his knee twice, their signal for immediate danger requiring discussion in private. They finish their meal unhurriedly, maintaining the appearance of fishers enjoying an unexpected night in port. When they leave the restaurant, they head not toward their docked boat, but toward a small hostel where they occasionally rent rooms when weather prevents return to their island. In the privacy of their rented room, Elena finally shares what she witnessed. Los Halcones, she concludes. They're searching La Esperanza for something specific. Marco absorbs this information, expression darkening. During his Delta Force years, he'd helped dismantle several Halcones operations along the border. Elena's DEA teams had later seized millions in cartel assets and arrested key lieutenants. Of all potential enemies who might discover their new identities, Los Halcones represented one of the most dangerous possibilities. "We need to know if they've identified us specifically," he says finally, "or if they're just fishing for information." "About the islands," Elena nods. "I'll make contact with Rodrigo tomorrow. He might have heard something." Rodrigo, a retired Mexican naval intelligence officer now running a charter business in Puerto Marquez, occasionally provides them information about cartel movements in exchange for cash. His connections remain valuable, though they use this resource sparingly to avoid creating patterns that might expose their background. They prepare for sleep, taking turns watching the street below through partially closed blinds. The armed men maintain their positions near the harbor throughout the night, rotating with 2 additional operatives who arrive shortly after midnight. Further confirmation of a professional surveillance operation with resources for round-the-clock coverage. As dawn approaches, Elena and Marco exchange somber glances. Their peaceful existence has been disrupted, perhaps permanently. Whether they've been identified specifically or merely caught in some broader cartel operation remains unclear, but one reality has become certain. The approaching threat can no longer be ignored. The revelation moment, morning light filters through worn curtains as Elena finishes securing her hair beneath a faded cap. Her movements are precise, economical, reminiscent of pre-mission rituals from her DEA days. Across the small hostel room, Marco checks his phone, finding no suspicious messages from the minimal network of contacts they maintain. "I'll meet Rodrigo at the market," Elena says, adjusting her appearance to maximize the impression of an ordinary fisherman's wife shopping for supplies. "You watch the boat," Marco nods. Their practiced division of responsibilities requires no elaboration. If cartel members are specifically targeting them, separating briefly might reveal whether surveillance follows one or both of them. Valuable intelligence for planning their next move. 90 minutes, he replies. Their agreed time limit for independent operations. Then we regroup at Maria's Cafe, regardless of outcomes. Elena slips out through the hostel's side entrance, moving unhurriedly through awakening streets. Vendors arrange produce displays, restaurant workers hose down. Sidewalks and early tourists emerge yawning from guest houses. She maintains the casual demeanor of someone with mundane errands, while monitoring reflective surfaces for signs of pursuit. The central market buzzes with morning commerce. Fishmongers arranging the day's catch on ice, spice vendors creating pyramids of colorful powders, locals haggling over prices in animated Spanish. Elena purchases coffee from a street cart, positioning herself where she can observe multiple approach angles while appearing to simply enjoy the morning bustle. Rodrigo arrives at precisely 9 o'clock, his weathered face creased with his perpetual half-smile. At 62, the former intelligence officer moves with the slight stiffness of age, though Elena knows his mind remains razor-sharp. He greets her with customary warmth, air-kissing both cheeks like an old friend. "Elena, que sorpresa," he exclaims for anyone listening. "I didn't expect to see you in town today." They stroll through market stalls, maintaining the appearance of casual conversation while exchanging critical information in measured tones beneath the market's din. Los Halcones have been unusually active these past 2 weeks, Rodrigo confirms, examining mangoes as though considering a purchase. Not just here, all across Baja, they're searching for something or someone. Elena selects bread from a vendor's basket, her expression revealing nothing. Any names associated with the search? Rodrigo's hand trembles slightly, the only indication that his next words carry significant weight. They're hunting La Cazadora, the woman who led the Sinaloa raid 5 years ago. The bread nearly slips from Elena's fingers. La Cazadora, the huntress, was her operational nickname within Cartel circles, a moniker she'd earned through her ruthless efficiency at tracking high-value targets. The Sinaloa operation had been her final mission, the catastrophic raid where she and Marco were presumed killed, allowing them to disappear into new identities. "That operation was classified," she murmurs, mind racing. "No one connected it publicly to any specific agents." Rodrigo pays for his fruit, using the transaction to conceal their conversation from curious onlookers. Someone talked. Rumors say Joaquin Salazar recently discovered who led the team that killed his brother. Ice forms in Elena's veins. Joaquin and Salazar, current leader of Los Halcones, had indeed lost his brother Miguel during that final raid. Miguel's death had been incidental rather than targeted. He'd simply been in the wrong place when Elena's team breached the compound. But cartel vendettas make no distinction between intentional and accidental deaths. "How good is their intelligence?" she asks, voice steady despite the implications. "Good enough to narrow their search to the islands," Rodrigo replies. They have. A photograph from DEA files, outdated but recognizable. They're showing it selectively to trusted contacts along the coast. Elena absorbs this devastating news. Their carefully constructed anonymity has been compromised. Los Halcones aren't conducting routine surveillance. They're executing a targeted manhunt with Elena as the primary objective. "There's more," Rodrigo continues, directing her toward a quieter corner of the market. "They've brought in specialists, former military and intelligence operators, the kind who know how to hunt people who don't want to be found." Elena thinks of the disciplined men watching their boat, not typical cartel soldiers, but professional hunters. "How long do we have?" "Days, not weeks," Rodrigo answers grimly. "Salazar himself arrived in Puerto Peñasco yesterday. He's coordinating the search personally." This final revelation confirms the gravity of their situation. Cartel leaders rarely involve themselves directly in field operations unless the target holds immense significance. Joaquin Salazar has made Elena's capture a personal priority, a virtual death sentence. Elena thanks Rodrigo, pressing a folded envelope containing cash into his palm. The old intelligence officer clasps her hand briefly, his expression conveying both warning and regret. "Whatever your exit strategy is," he advises quietly, "implement it immediately." They part ways, maintaining the appearance of friendly acquaintances, concluding a chance encounter. Elena navigates the crowded market with newfound awareness of her vulnerability. Every stranger's glance might indicate recognition. Every passing car could contain enemies closing their net. She makes several unnecessary purchases to maintain her cover while processing this intelligence. Los Halcones haven't positively identified her yet. If they had, she'd already be surrounded. But they're systematically eliminating possibilities, narrowing their search with professional methodology. When Elena arrives at Maria's cafe, Marco is already seated at an outdoor table, coffee cup positioned to allow him unobstructed views of surrounding streets. His relaxed posture belies the tension she reads in his eyes. "We have a situation," she says quietly, sliding into the chair opposite him. As Elena relays Rodrigo's information, Marco's expression remains neutral, though his fingers tighten incrementally around his cup. When she finishes, he exhales slowly, calculations visibly running behind his eyes. "They've identified the islands but not our specific location," he summarizes. "So we have narrow window before they connect Elena Vega with La Cazadora." "Our contingency plans assume generic threats," Elena notes, "not a specialized manhunt." "Directed by Salazar himself," Marco checks his watch. "Our scheduled departure time is in 40 minutes. Any deviation alerts them something's wrong. And returning to the island potentially leads them directly to our safe house," Elena adds. For several minutes, they sit in calculating silence, appearing to casual observers like a couple enjoying morning refreshments. In reality, they're rapidly assessing options, evaluating escape routes, and calculating survival probabilities with the precision of their former professions. "We maintain course," Marco finally decides. "Return to the island as scheduled, but implement Protocol Avalanche once we're home. If they're watching the boat, sudden changes will only accelerate their timeline." Protocol Avalanche, their most comprehensive evacuation plan, designed for worst-case scenarios. It will mean destroying 5 years of careful work, abandoning their home, and activating emergency resources they'd hoped never to use. Elena nods agreement, though the prospect of losing their hard-won sanctuary sends a pang through her chest. "I observed 3 men with direct sightlines to La Esperanza this morning, 2 more monitoring harbor exits. 4 total on rotation," Marco confirms. 2 more arrived by sedan at dawn, probably coordination team. "They're professional, but not hiding their presence from someone who knows what to look for. This suggests Los Halcones remains uncertain whether they've found their target, surveillance rather than capture teams. Once positive identification occurs, tactics will shift drastically toward overwhelming force. They finish their coffee and proceed toward the harbor with deliberate normalcy, stopping to purchase final supplies that complete their fisherman cover story. Throughout these movements, they employ counter-surveillance techniques disguised as everyday actions. Elena adjusting her hat while checking reflections, Marco pausing to retie his shoe while scanning for observers. At the dock, La Esperanza waits exactly as they left it, though Elena immediately notices subtle signs of the previous night's search. Rope coiled differently. Equipment shifted slightly from its usual position. As they load their supplies, Marco conducts a sweep for tracking devices while appearing to inspect the hull for damage. "Clean," he murmurs when they move into the cabin. They searched thoroughly, but didn't plant anything. This suggests the surveillance team remains uncertain of their targets' identities, monitoring rather than actively tracking. A small advantage, but significant. As they prepare to cast off, Elena notices a weathered fishing boat docking several slips away. The vessel itself appears unremarkable, but the four men disembarking move with the coordinated precision of military units, rather than the casual disarray of actual fishermen. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, scans the harbor methodically. "Reinforcements," Elena murmurs, pretending to check mooring lines. 4 o'clock, blue vessel. Marco doesn't turn to look, instead busying himself with engine preparations. Description: lead is approximately 6 foot 210 pounds, facial scar, military bearing. 3 associates, similar profiles, all wearing fishing clothes but moving in tactical formation. Knowledge crystallizes between them. These aren't merely surveillance operatives, but capture specialists, the kind deployed when targets have been tentatively identified and extraction becomes the primary objective. Marco starts the engines with practiced calm despite this alarming development. "Departure in 30 seconds, he announces, just loudly enough for nearby docks to hear. "Standard route." Their agreed strategy remains unchanged. Maintain cover until safely away from port, then implement their emergency protocols. Deviation now would only confirm suspicions and potentially trigger immediate intervention. As La Esperanza pulls away from the dock, Elena watches the scarred man answer a phone call. His gaze locks onto their departing vessel with sudden intensity. His posture stiffening with recognition or new information, he speaks rapidly to his team, who immediately begin returning to their boat. "We've been made," she says quietly, maintaining her casual stance at the bow. They're mobilizing to follow. Marco adjusts their course slightly, navigating through harbor traffic with deliberate normality while processing this development. Time to execution. "They've identified the islands but not our specific location," he summarizes. "So we have narrow window before they connect Elena Vega with La Cazadora. Our contingency plans assumed generic threats," Elena notes. "Not a specialized manhunt. Directed by Salazar himself." Marco checks his watch. "Our scheduled departure time is in 40 minutes. Any deviation alerts them something's wrong. And returning to the island potentially leads them directly to our safe house," Elena adds. For several minutes, they sit in calculating silence, appearing to casual observers like a couple enjoying morning refreshments. In reality, they're rapidly assessing options, evaluating escape routes and calculating survival probabilities with the precision of their former professions. "We maintain course," Marco finally decides. "Return to the island as scheduled, but implement Protocol Avalanche once we're home. If they're watching the boat, sudden changes will only accelerate their timeline." Protocol Avalanche, their most comprehensive evacuation plan, designed for worst-case scenarios. It will mean destroying 5 years of careful work, abandoning their home, and activating emergency resources they'd hoped never to use. Elena nods agreement, though the prospect of losing their hard-won sanctuary sends a pang through her chest. "I observed 3 men with direct sight lines to La Esperanza this morning. 2 more monitoring harbor exits. 4 total on rotation," Marco confirms. 2 more arrived by Sedan at dawn, probably coordination team. They're professional, but not hiding their presence from someone who knows what to look for. This suggests Los Halcones remains uncertain whether they've found their target. Surveillance rather than capture teams. Once positive identification occurs, tactics will shift drastically toward overwhelming force. They finish their coffee and proceed toward the harbor with deliberate normalcy, stopping to purchase final supplies that complete their fisherman cover story. Throughout these movements, they employ counter-surveillance techniques disguised as everyday actions. Elena adjusting her hat while checking reflections, Marco pausing to retie his shoe while scanning for observers. At the dock, La Esperanza waits exactly as they left it, though Elena immediately notices subtle signs of the previous night's search. Rope coiled differently, equipment shifted slightly from its usual position. As they load their supplies, Marco conducts a sweep for tracking devices while appearing to inspect the hull for damage. "Clean," he murmurs when they move into the cabin. They searched thoroughly but didn't plant anything. This suggests the surveillance team remains uncertain of their targets' identities, monitoring rather than actively tracking. A small advantage, but significant. As they prepare to cast off, Elena notices a weathered fishing boat docking several slips away. The vessel itself appears unremarkable, but the four men disembarking move with the coordinated precision of military units rather than the casual disarray of actual fishermen. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, scans the harbor methodically. "Reinforcements," Elena murmurs, pretending to check mooring lines. 4 o'clock, blue vessel. Marco doesn't turn to look, instead busying himself with engine preparations. Description: lead is approximately 6 foot, 210 pounds, facial scar, military bearing. 3 associates, similar profiles, all wearing fishing clothes but moving in tactical formation. Knowledge crystallizes between them. These aren't merely surveillance operatives, but capture specialists. The kind deployed when targets have been tentatively identified and extraction becomes the primary objective. Marco starts the engines with practiced calm, despite this alarming development. "Departure in 30 seconds, he announces, just loudly enough for nearby docks to hear. "Standard route." Their agreed strategy remains unchanged. Maintain cover until safely away from port, then implement their emergency protocols. Deviation now would only confirm suspicions and potentially trigger immediate intervention. As La Esperanza pulls away from the dock, Elena watches the scarred man answer a phone call. His gaze locks onto their departing vessel with sudden intensity, his posture stiffening with recognition or new information. He speaks rapidly to his team, who immediately begin returning to their boat. "We've been made," she says quietly, maintaining her casual stance at the bow. They're mobilizing to follow. Marco adjusts their course slightly, navigating through harbor traffic with deliberate normality while processing this development. Time to execution. 3 minutes until they're underway, Elena estimates. Their vessel looks equipped for pursuit, twin outboards, reinforced hull. They'll overtake us in open water if they push those engines. The familiar weight of her 9mm Glock concealed beneath her jacket suddenly feels insufficient against the firepower likely carried by a cartel extraction team. Their own weapons cache, hidden beneath La Esperanza's false deck panels, includes more substantial options, but revealing such armaments would irrevocably shatter their civilian cover. As they clear the harbor entrance, Marco makes a decision, altering course toward a narrow channel between 2 small islands. This route, challenging to navigate but familiar to them after years of local fishing, might provide tactical advantages against pursuers. "When we reach Coral Pass," he says, referring to a particularly treacherous stretch, "we show them who they're really dealing with." Elena nods grimly, understanding his intent. Their charade as simple fishers has ended. Survival now depends on embracing the lethal skills they've suppressed for 5 years. Behind them, the Cartel boat clears the harbor, engines roaring to full power as it begins pursuit. The distance between vessels shrinks rapidly, confirming Elena's assessment of their superior speed. She moves to the hidden compartment, removing the false panel to reveal their emergency arsenal. M4 carbines with suppressed barrels, fragmentation grenades, body armor, and communication equipment that would bewilder anyone who believed them mere fishers. As Elena distributes equipment, Marco navigates with increasing complexity, utilizing his intimate knowledge of local waters to maintain separation from their pursuers. The narrow channel approaches, limestone cliffs rising on either side to create a natural bottleneck where ambush becomes possible. "Ready?" Marco asks, accepting the body armor Elena passes him while maintaining control of the vessel. Elena checks. Her weapon, the familiar weight and extension of herself. 5 years of peaceful existence falls away as muscle memory resurfaces. The stance, grip, and focus of someone trained to eliminate threats with lethal efficiency. "Ready?" she confirms, her voice carrying the cold precision that once made Cartel. Enforces fear La Cazadora. The first shots ring out across the water as the pursuit boat closes range, warning fire aimed near their engines. The illusion of normal life shatters completely as the revelation moment arrives in a hail of bullets. The first defensive stand. The limestone walls of Coral Pass rise 30 feet on either side of the narrow channel, creating a natural canyon where water churns through a gauntlet of submerged rocks. Marco navigates with practiced precision, La Esperanza's hull skimming past hazards that would tear open vessels piloted by less experienced hands. Behind them, the Cartel boat hesitates at the channel entrance, momentarily wary of the treacherous passage. "They'll follow," Elena says, checking the M4's action. "But cautiously, that gives us 30 seconds. Marco nods, maintaining focus on the hazardous route while processing tactical options. Position 2/3 through, right side outcropping. Elena immediately understands his strategy. Halfway through the pass, a distinctive rock shelf juts from the right wall, creating a natural defensive position with optimal firing angles. She's thought of it herself during their numerous passages through this channel, a professional reflex she could never fully suppress despite years of peaceful living. The pursuing vessel finally commits to the channel, engines throttling down, as it navigates the initial section. Through her rifle scope, Elena counts 4 armed men, the scarred leader now holding what appears to be a military-grade assault rifle, his companions similarly equipped. Not Cartel street soldiers, but specialized hunters with tactical training. 300 meters and closing, she reports. Weapons visible. Marco maneuvers La Esperanza alongside the rock shelf, cutting engines just enough to maintain position without drifting into hazards. The sudden reduction in speed might alert their pursuers that something has changed, but the advantage of their chosen position outweighs this concern. Elena moves with fluid economy, taking up her firing position against the boat's rear gunwale. The rifle settles against her shoulder with familiar weight, her breathing automatically adjusting to the rhythmic pattern of an experienced marksman. Inhale, half exhale, hold. "I'll disable their vessel," she states, sighting down the barrel. "Non-lethal first shot as warning." Marco secures the wheel, then retrieves his own weapon from the hidden compartment. "Acknowledged." I'll cover high position in case they have someone on the cliff edge. The cartel boat continues its approach, now close enough that Elena can distinguish facial features. The scarred leader scans their seemingly adrift fishing vessel with obvious suspicion, barking orders to his men who spread across their deck. With weapons raised, Elena centers her scope on the pursuing boat's exposed engine housing. A precision shot here will disable their propulsion without risking detonation of fuel lines. A calculated warning rather than a lethal first strike. She exhales slowly, finger taking up trigger slack. The suppressed rifle bucks against her shoulder, its report barely audible over the channel's natural acoustics. Through her scope, she watches the round impact exactly where intended, tearing through critical engine components in a spray of metal and fluid. Black smoke immediately billows from the damaged machinery. The effect is instantaneous. The cartel boat lurches as one engine dies, throwing the armed men off balance. Confusion erupts on their deck until the scarred leader spots Elena's position, gesturing urgently toward La Esperanza. Contact imminent, Marco warns from his elevated position near the cabin, where he monitors the cliff edges for additional threats. The cartel vessel, now operating on a single engine with compromised steering, attempts to maneuver closer despite its damaged state. The scarred leader raises his rifle, shouting something lost to distance and wind. Elena makes a split-second decision, adjusting her aim to the water directly in front of their boat. A final warning before escalating to direct engagement. Her second shot sends up a spray of water mere feet from their bow. "Close enough," she shouts across the water in Spanish. "Next one isn't a warning." For a moment, standoff tension crackles across the narrow channel. The cartel team, clearly surprised by the precision shooting and tactical positioning, reassesses their approach. Their leader confers hurriedly with his associates, their expressions conveying dawning recognition that they aren't dealing with ordinary fishermen. Then, with practiced coordination, the cartel team disperses to firing positions. Their leader barks a command, and bullets tear across the water toward La Esperanza. Not the sporadic fire of panicked shooters, but the disciplined volleys of trained combatants. Elena ducks as rounds impact their hull, the reinforced material absorbing impacts that would shred a normal fishing vessel. Marco returns fire in controlled bursts, forcing two cartel shooters to scramble for better cover. "They're trying to circle to our blind side," Marco calls, indicating a maneuver where the damaged cartel boat attempts to drift toward a position where the cliff wall would shield them from Elena's fire. She adjusts immediately, sighting on their remaining operational engine. This time, her shot is not intended as warning, but elimination of pursuit capability. The round penetrates the engine block, and secondary explosions cascade through the mechanical components. Black smoke billows thicker as their second engine fails catastrophically. With both engines disabled, the cartel vessel begins drifting with the current, their tactical position deteriorating rapidly. Rather than retreating, however, the team intensifies their fire. The desperate aggression of hunters, realizing their prey is far more dangerous than anticipated. A bullet grazes Elena's shoulder, tearing fabric without breaking skin. She responds with methodical precision, targeting the cartel boat's communication equipment mounted near its helm. Her shot demolishes the radio array, severing their ability to call reinforcements. "They're committed now," Marco observes grimly. "No retreat option." Elena understands the implication. Despite their disabled vessel, the cartel team shows no indication of surrender. This confrontation will end only when one side is completely neutralized. The firefight intensifies, echo of gunshots reverberating between limestone walls. Elena and Marco operate with the synchronized efficiency of longtime partners, alternating, covering fire to prevent either from being pinned down. Their defensive position provides superior angles, while the cartel team struggles with their increasingly precarious situation aboard a drifting, damaged vessel. One cartel shooter attempts to reach an elevated position on their bow, presumably seeking better firing angles. Marco tracks the movement, waiting until the man fully exposes himself before firing a single, precisely placed shot. The impact throws the shooter backward, his weapon tumbling into churning waters. 3 remaining, Elena notes clinically, shifting position to account for changing dynamics. The scarred leader recognizes their deteriorating tactical situation. With unexpected decisiveness, he gestures to his remaining men, who produce what appear to be specialized underwater propulsion devices from a storage compartment. "They're going mobile," Marco warns, spotting the equipment. Underwater approach. This development threatens their defensive advantage. If cartel operatives successfully deploy into the water with breathing apparatus, they could approach La Esperanza from multiple angles, including beneath the waterline, where Marco and Elena have limited coverage. Elena quickly reassesses their options, calculating trajectories and vulnerabilities. "I'll maintain position. You secure the lower deck." Marco moves immediately to protect against underwater assault, retrieving specialized defensive equipment from their hidden arsenal. Underwater charges designed to deter exactly this type of approach. Originally developed for military counter-assault operations, these devices create concussive underwater deterrence without lethal force at certain distances. As Marco deploys these devices around their hull, Elena maintains suppressing fire, forcing the cartel team to execute their water insertion. Under combat conditions, the scarred leader and one operative successfully enter the water with their equipment, while the third provides covering fire from their drifting vessel. 2 in the water, Elena reports, tracking bubbles that indicate their initial movement. Direction: heading towards the stern. Marco finishes securing the underwater deterrence, then returns to a firing position with a different weapon, a specialized grenade launcher loaded with concussive rounds designed for underwater effectiveness. Standard ammunition loses lethality quickly underwater, but these specialized munitions maintain disruptive force through liquid medium. "Ready on your mark," he confirms, aiming toward the bubble trails. Elena continues exchanging fire with the remaining shooter on the cartel boat, pinning him down while monitoring the underwater approach. When the bubble patterns indicate optimal positioning, she gives the signal, "Now." Marco fires the specialized round, which enters the water with minimal splash before detonating approximately 15 feet below the surface. The underwater explosion sends a powerful pressure wave in all directions, designed to incapacitate divers without causing permanent injury at certain ranges. The surface erupts in churning turbulence. Moments later, one cartel operative surfaces involuntarily, clearly disoriented by the concussive effect. His breathing apparatus damaged, he flails toward the nearest rock edge, combat effectiveness temporarily neutralized. The scarred leader surfaces further away, apparently having recognized the threat and distanced himself from the primary blast radius. Though clearly affected, he maintains enough function to draw a sidearm and fire toward La Esperanza, while swimming one-armed toward a narrow rock ledge. Elena tracks his movement, calculating bullet trajectory, accounting for water refraction. Her shot strikes precisely where intended. Not a lethal hit, but a disabling wound to his shoulder that causes him to drop his weapon with a howl of pain and rage. "Threat contained," she announces, shifting attention back to the cartel boat, where the remaining shooter now raises his hands in surrender, weapon laid visibly on the deck. The sudden silence feels almost disorienting after the firefight's intensity. The channel's natural sounds slowly reassert themselves. Water lapping against rock, distant seabirds calling, wind whistling through limestone formations. Marco maintains his weapon trained on the surrendering cartel operative, while Elena covers. The wounded men struggling toward rock ledges. Their professional training evident, they've switched seamlessly from offense to containment without need for verbal coordination. "Check for communications devices," Elena instructs the surrendering man in Spanish. "Toss any phones or radios into the water, now." The operative complies, removing a satellite phone and what appears to be a backup radio from his tactical vest, dropping both into the churning channel. His movements betray the stunned disbelief of someone whose operation has catastrophically reversed. Marco starts La Esperanza's engines, maneuvering closer to the damaged cartel vessel while maintaining safe distance. "How many more in your team?" he demands. "And how far behind are they?" The surrendering operative hesitates, clearly calculating whether withholding information might improve his situation. Elena's next shot, striking precisely between his feet on the deck, eliminates any indecision. "6 more, he answers rapidly. 2 boats, maybe 20 minutes behind us." This intelligence confirms they face not merely an isolated team, but a coordinated manhunt with multiple assets. Their successful defense against the first wave has bought time, but reinforcements will inevitably follow the same route when their lead team fails to report. The scarred leader, now clinging to a narrow rock ledge with his wounded arm hanging useless, laughs despite his predicament. "You think this ends here?" he calls in accented English. "Salazar has dedicated every resource to finding La Cazadora. This is just the beginning." Elena studies him without responding, recognizing the implication. Los Halcones now have confirmation of her identity. This wasn't merely a reconnaissance team, but an advance force meant to verify their target before the main assault group arrived. "We need to move," Marco says quietly. "Secure these 3 or eliminate them." It's a cold calculation of survival odds versus moral boundaries. Leaving cartel operatives alive means potential intelligence about their defensive capabilities reaching Salazar. Eliminating surrendered combatants crosses ethical lines they've both respected throughout their careers. Elena makes her decision. Secure them. We're not executioners. Using cable ties from their emergency kit, they efficiently restrain the 3 cartel operatives, positioning them on the rock ledges where they'll remain safely above water level until inevitable discovery by cartel reinforcements. Search teams will find them alive, but too late to maintain pursuit. "You've only delayed the inevitable," the scarred leader spits as they finish securing his bonds. "Salazar controls everything in this region, every port, every airstrip, every road. There's nowhere you can run." Marco checks the restraints one final time. "We're not running," he responds simply. They return to La Esperanza, immediately resuming course through the remainder of the channel while collecting and securing their tactical equipment. Their peaceful fisherman facade lies irretrievably shattered, necessitating immediate implementation of contingency plans developed years earlier for precisely this scenario. As they emerge from Coral Pass into open water, Elena studies their nautical charts, plotting a course neither toward their island home nor any obvious escape route. Instead, she selects a heading that will appear contradictory to anyone attempting to predict their movements. "We have 20 minutes until reinforcements arrive at the channel," she calculates. "Another 30 before they can process what happened and reorganize pursuit." Marco nods, pushing their engines to maximum sustainable output. "Enough time to implement avalanche protocol if we move decisively." Elena gazes once toward the horizon where their island home remains invisibly distant. 5 years of carefully constructed peace now sacrificed to survival necessity. She allows herself exactly 3 seconds of regret before refocusing entirely on the tactical challenges ahead. "Los Halcones thinks they're hunting La Cazadora," she says, checking ammunition stores and communication equipment. "Time to show them why that name once made cartel lieutenants lose sleep." Marco's grim smile acknowledges the transformation they've both undergone in mere hours. From retired operatives maintaining cover to active combatants embracing their lethal skill sets. The fisherman and his wife have vanished, replaced by the elite military and law enforcement specialists they'd once been. The first defensive stand has ended in their favor. What follows will require every skill they've spent careers perfecting, every contingency they've meticulously planned, and every ounce of the ruthless efficiency that once made them legends in classified circles. La Esperanza cuts through azure waters, carrying not simple fishers, but awakened predators, preparing to demonstrate precisely why hunting them was Salazar's most catastrophic miscalculation. Elena consults their radar display, where multiple signals now spread throughout the outer labyrinth. Cartel vessels attempting to establish search patterns despite the challenging environment. Northern route, she decides. They're expecting us to break for open water. Let's disappear deeper instead. Marco immediately adjusts course, guiding La Esperanza into the narrowest, most complex section of the island maze. Here, mangrove roots create natural canopies overhead, while shifting sandbars form an ever-changing underwater landscape that defeats standard navigation systems. Their progress slows to a crawl as Marco navigates by memory and instinct rather than instrumentation. This route, nearly invisible unless precisely followed, leads to a concealed inlet they discovered 3 years earlier, a natural hideaway unreachable by larger vessels and undetectable from overhead surveillance. Radar signatures dispersing, Elena reports. They're implementing grid search patterns, but focusing on southern quadrants. Their countermeasures have successfully confused the pursuit, at least temporarily. Los Halcones teams now waste resources searching empty water, while Elena and Marco penetrate deeper into territory the cartel considers impassable. 30 minutes of careful navigation brings them to the hidden inlet, a narrow channel that winds behind a larger island, terminating in a sheltered cove surrounded by dense mangroves. The water depth drops precipitously within the cove, creating a natural deep water dock concealed by overhead vegetation. Marco guides La Esperanza to the innermost section, cutting all propulsion. The sudden silence feels almost tangible after hours of tension and movement. Birds call from nearby trees, waves lap gently against the hull, but no human sounds intrude on this hidden sanctuary. "We've bought some time," Elena acknowledges, powering down non-essential systems to minimize heat signatures detectable by sophisticated scanning equipment. But this is temporary at best. Marco secures the vessel while reviewing their strategic position on specialized topographic maps. Protocol Avalanche requires abandoning La Esperanza. Are we committed? The question carries significant weight. Their boat represents not merely transportation, but a mobile safe house containing equipment, weapons, and resources accumulated over 5 years. Abandoning it means sacrificing substantial tactical advantages. Elena considers alternatives briefly before reaching the inevitable conclusion. We're committed. La Esperanza's description is now associated with armed resistance against Los Halcones. Maintaining this vessel compromises all future movement options. The decision made, they begin methodically implementing the first stage of Protocol Avalanche, their most comprehensive escape and evasion plan developed during sleepless nights. When memories of past operations left them planning for worst-case scenarios. From concealed compartments throughout the vessel, they retrieve essential elements, non-sequential currency in multiple denominations, identification documents with alternate identities, specialized communication equipment, compact weapon systems with suppression capabilities, and medication, including antibiotics and pain management options. Geographical distribution. Marco inquires. Organizing items into specialized waterproof containers, Elena indicates positions on their map. Cache Alpha remains our primary fallback, mainland position, established 3 years ago with quarterly verification. Cache Bravo and Charlie provide secondary options depending on cartel movement patterns. These caches, supplies and equipment hidden at strategic locations throughout the region, represent another layer of their contingency planning. Each contains sufficient resources to sustain them while establishing new identities or initiating counter-operations against pursuing forces. As they prepare essential gear for transport, Elena activates a specialized device that begins systematically overwriting La Esperanza's navigation systems and communication logs. This digital sanitization removes all evidence of their regular routes, frequently visited locations, and communication patterns. Physical evidence removal next, she notes, retrieving thermite charges from their tactical supplies. These specialized, incendiary devices, military-grade and virtually impossible for civilians to acquire, will ensure that nothing useful remains if cartel forces eventually locate the vessel. Specifically designed to burn hot enough to destroy even metal components, they'll reduce La Esperanza to unidentifiable debris. Marco positions the charges at structural points throughout the boat, while Elena completes their equipment organization. Each movement reflects years of operational experience. Methodical, precise, leaving nothing to chance. Detonation options? Marco asks, connecting the final charge to a centralized timing system. Remote trigger with 48-hour backup timer. Elena decides, after brief consideration. Gives us flexibility without requiring return to this position. This arrangement allows them to destroy the vessel remotely once safely away, or ensures automatic destruction after a set period if communication becomes impossible. Either way, Los Halcones will find nothing useful in the remains. With charges set and essential equipment packed, they conduct a final sweep of their home for the past 5 years. Despite the urgency, both pause briefly in the main cabin, absorbing details they'll likely never see again. The small kitchen where they shared countless meals, the table where they plotted fishing routes while secretly maintaining vigilance, the modest sleeping quarters where they found rare peace. 5 years, Elena murmurs, running fingertips along a wooden cabinet she'd personally restored. Longer than I thought we'd get. Marco nods, understanding completely. Neither harbored illusions about permanent escape when they orchestrated the disappearance after the Sinaloa operation. Former elite operatives with their history accumulate too many enemies, create too many grievances. The surprise isn't that Los Halcones finally found them, but that they enjoyed 5 years of relative peace before it happened. 30 seconds, Marco says quietly, allowing themselves this brief acknowledgement before necessity reclaims priority. When the moment passes, they exit La Esperanza with 3 waterproof packs containing their essential supplies. The specialized inflatable raft they deploy makes virtually no sound as it slides into water, its material designed to minimize both visual and radar signatures. They paddle silently through mangrove channels, following a route they've previously scouted during routine fishing expeditions, always planning, always preparing for the moment when their sanctuary might be compromised. Half an hour of careful navigation brings them to the opposite side of the island complex. Here, the dense mangrove forest transitions to a narrow strip of sandy beach facing away from the mainland, an approach direction Los Halcones surveillance would consider illogical for anyone attempting to escape the region. Extraction timeline? Marco asks, securing their raft beneath camouflaging vegetation. Elena checks her specialized timepiece. 6 hours until optimal extraction window. We hold position and monitor cartel search patterns until then. They establish a temporary observation post at the island's highest point, a rocky outcropping, providing clear sightlines across surrounding waters while remaining concealed from casual observation. Using compact, high-powered optics, they track movement patterns of pursuing vessels now spread throughout the outer archipelago. Search protocols indicate confusion, Marco observes after an hour of surveillance. They're maintaining standard grid patterns rather than concentrating forces along probable escape vectors. Elena nods agreement. Their tactical coordinator lacks experience with targets of our capability level. They're treating this like a standard pursuit operation. This assessment provides modest reassurance. Despite Joaquin Salazar's personal involvement in the hunt, Los Halcones field teams appear to lack sophisticated manhunting expertise against targets with military and intelligence backgrounds. Their numerical advantage remains significant, but their tactical approach reveals exploitable weaknesses. As afternoon fades toward evening, they observe cartel vessels regrouping, apparently establishing patrol zones around likely exit channels. From the island complex, this strategy, while logical against typical fugitives, demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of Elena and Marco's operational capabilities. They're assuming conventional escape vectors, Elena notes with professional assessment rather than relief, maintaining perimeter coverage rather than penetrating the interior. Marco adjusts their extraction calculations based on observed patrol patterns. Northern approach will be cleanest, intercept point adjusted 3 kilometers northeast of original coordinates. Elena transmits these updated coordinates through their specialized communication system, a burst transmission lasting less than 2 seconds, virtually undetectable without focused electronic surveillance directly overhead. As darkness descends, they apply specialized camouflage materials to exposed skin and equipment, compounds that minimize heat signatures detectable by night vision equipment. Another layer of protection against cartel teams potentially employing military-grade surveillance technology. First movement phase initiates in 40 minutes. Marco confirms, checking his watch against astronomical charts showing precise moonrise timing. Their extraction plan utilizes natural conditions that compromise surveillance effectiveness. The brief period when rising moonlight creates confusing reflection patterns across water surfaces while remaining insufficient for clear visual identification at distance. Elena performs final equipment checks, ensuring weapons remain accessible without compromising movement capabilities. The familiar weight of her tactical gear, once daily routine during DEA operations, feels almost nostalgic, despite the dire circumstances necessitating its use. "We've prepared for this scenario since day one," she reminds Marco, though he requires no reassurance. 5 years of contingency planning against precisely this threat profile. Marco acknowledges with the slight nod that characterizes his most focused operational state. His expression reveals nothing beyond absolute concentration. Yet Elena reads volumes in his posture, the coiled readiness of Delta Force's legendary ghost operative emerging from beneath the Fisherman's weathered exterior. As moonlight begins, silvering distant waves, they position themselves at their designated departure point. The next phase requires precise timing, absolute silence, and flawless execution, qualities that once made them their respective agencies' most effective field operators. "Los Halcones wanted to hunt La Cazadora," Elena murmurs, checking her weapon one final time. "They've succeeded only in awakening her." The cold precision in her voice would be recognizable to Cartel enforcers who once feared her tactical operations across Central America. The methodical special agent Cortez, who dismantled trafficking networks with surgical precision rather than the peaceful fisher Elena Vega. Behind them, hidden among mangroves, La Esperanza awaits its final contribution to their escape strategy. When the moment comes, its destruction will provide both tactical distraction and elimination of evidence. A fitting end for the vessel that sheltered their temporary peace. The strategic retreat nears completion. What follows will demonstrate whether Los Halcones truly comprehend the caliber of operatives they've chosen to pursue. The antagonist development, Joaquin Salazar, studies satellite imagery of the archipelago displayed across 3 monitors in his command center. Located in the penthouse suite of Puerto Peñasco's most exclusive hotel, this temporary headquarters bristles with communication equipment, surveillance technology, and armed security. Despite the luxurious surroundings, Salazar's expression remains coldly focused as he traces potential escape vectors from the island chain. "How did a simple fishing couple manage this?" demands Victor Reyes, Salazar's second-in-command, jabbing. A finger at footage showing their disabled advance team being discovered by the secondary search group. 3 of our best acquisition specialists neutralized by people supposedly retired for 5 years. Salazar doesn't immediately respond. At 46, he carries himself with the calculated restraint of someone who has built an empire through patience rather than impulsive action. His tailored suit conceals a physique maintained through rigorous discipline, while his carefully groomed appearance projects the corporate image he cultivates for public consumption. Only his eyes, dark and utterly devoid of compassion, betray the predatory nature beneath this polished exterior. "She was never simple," he finally says, voice carrying the refined accent of his European education. La Cazadora eliminated 17 of our key operations in 3 years. Her tactical intelligence rivals any military commander I've encountered. He magnifies a section of the archipelago where radar signatures suggest unusual movement patterns. And her companion is equally dangerous, former Delta Force, rumored to have conducted operations even Pentagon officials deny knowledge of. Together, they represent the most lethal partnership ever fielded against cartel interests. Victor absorbs this assessment with growing concern. You've known their capabilities all along, yet you committed minimal resources to the initial acquisition attempt. Salazar's expression doesn't change, though everyone in the room recognizes the dangerous territory Victor has entered by questioning operational decisions. After a calculated pause that elevates tension throughout the command center, Salazar responds with measured precision. I needed confirmation before committing our specialized resources. Now we have it. He turns to a communications specialist monitoring encrypted channels. Status of the extraction team. Airborne as scheduled, the technician confirms. ETA 90 minutes to designated landing zone. Satisfaction flickers briefly across Salazar's features. And our asset within the Mexican Navy? Commander Ortega confirms naval patrols have been redirected away from our operational area for the next 24 hours. Satellite coverage has also been adjusted to create a surveillance gap across the southern archipelago. This information, evidence of Salazar's extensive influence within Mexican military and government structures, draws appreciative murmurs from operational staff. Los Halcones' territorial control extends beyond physical geography into bureaucratic and surveillance infrastructures meant to oppose them. Salazar returns his attention to the satellite imagery, where tiny dots representing search vessels move in coordinated patterns across island channels. They'll anticipate conventional pursuit strategies and prepare countermeasures accordingly, he observes. We need to implement asymmetric approaches. He gestures to a stern-faced woman monitoring technical systems in the corner. Valentina, status on the specialized tracking system. Valentina Morales, Los Halcones' head of technical operations and former Israeli intelligence operative, approaches with a specialized tablet. Thermal imaging drones are deployed across the northeastern quadrant as instructed. We've modified sensitivity parameters to identify human signatures, even through dense foliage cover. This technology, military-grade surveillance equipment illegally acquired through Salazar's international connections, represents capabilities far beyond typical cartel operations. His obsession with capturing La Cazadora has driven unprecedented resource allocation toward this single objective. And the maritime predictive analytics, he inquires, processing current data against historical movement patterns, Valentina confirms. Algorithm suggests highest probability vectors highlighted in red. The display updates to show several narrow channels illuminated in crimson, likely escape routes based on water depth, cover availability, and distance from established patrol zones. Salazar studies these with particular interest, recognizing the computational advantage this provides over traditional pursuit methods. Deploy additional teams to these 3 corridors, he instructs, indicating specific channels. Passive surveillance only. No engagement without direct authorization. A communications officer immediately relays these instructions to field teams, while Salazar turns to larger strategic considerations. He activates a secondary display showing a detailed profile compiled on Elena Vega, formerly Special Agent Elena Cortez of the DEA's Special Operations Division. The dossier contains professional history, psychological assessment, tactical tendencies, and known associates. Intelligence compiled through years of patient investigation and strategic bribery of government officials. Beside this appears a similar profile for Marco Vega, formerly Master Sergeant Marco Cole, Delta Force operative specializing in deep cover operations and high-value target elimination. 5 years ago, these two individuals were officially declared dead following Operation Kingfisher, Salazar explains, for the benefit of staff members unfamiliar with the complete background. A convenient fiction that allowed them to disappear after Elena Cortez led the raid resulting in my brother's death. The mention of Miguel Salazar, former Los Halcones enforcer, killed during the Sinaloa operation, brings solemn acknowledgement. From longtime cartel members present, Joaquin's methodical pursuit of vengeance for his brother represents both personal obsession and organizational imperative, demonstrating that those who harm Los Halcones face consequences regardless of time or distance. Miguel deserved better than dying alongside common soldiers, Salazar continues, rare emotion briefly coloring his tone. He deserved honor in death, a worthy opponent rather than an anonymous federal agent. I've spent 5 years identifying precisely who led that operation. He indicates a surveillance photograph showing Elena loading fishing equipment onto La Esperanza, evidence of the patient intelligence gathering that finally located their target after years of searching. When this woman dies, she will know exactly why and, more importantly, who ended her life. The personal vendetta underlying this sophisticated manhunt becomes unmistakable. While Los Halcones regularly eliminates threats to their operation, this pursuit transcends ordinary cartel violence to become Joaquin Salazar's personal mission. Of retribution, Victor studies operational displays showing search patterns across the archipelago. Current intelligence suggests they've abandoned their vessel and initiated some pre-planned escape protocol. Standard containment approaches may prove insufficient. Salazar nods, unsurprised by this assessment, which is why we're implementing extraordinary measures. He signals to a communications technician, "Connect me with Commander Ortega." When the encrypted connection establishes, Salazar speaks with the easy familiarity of long association. "Commander, we require implementation of Contingency Protocol Sierra. Authorization code Jaguar 793. The formal authentication sequence, unnecessary between long-time collaborators, serves to emphasize the operation's significance." Commander Ortega's response crackles through the specialized communication system, confirming compliance with whatever arrangement this coded language represents. Satisfaction registers subtly in Salazar's expression as he terminates the connection. Within 30 minutes, all civilian vessels will be instructed to clear these waters due to a naval exercise. Only official Mexican Navy craft and our assets will remain operational in the target zone. This revelation that Salazar can effectively clear public waterways using naval authority demonstrates Los Halcones' extraordinary penetration of military command structures. The implications extend beyond this specific operation, suggesting a level of institutional corruption that renders conventional law enforcement approaches virtually impossible. Additionally, Salazar continues, Commander Ortega has provided access codes for coastal surveillance systems covering our operational area. We now control all radar and automated identification systems monitoring vessel movements through these channels. Valentina immediately incorporates this new capability into their technical operations, effectively blinding legitimate authorities to activities within the pursuit zone while maintaining Los Halcones' comprehensive surveillance advantage. We've created a closed operational environment, Salazar concludes with clinical precision. No witnesses, no interference, no escape vectors beyond our observation capacity. As if orchestrated to emphasize this point, a communications specialist interrupts with breaking information. Sir, thermal imaging has detected a heat bloom consistent with an explosion on the northern island perimeter. Preliminary analysis suggests a vessel destruction signature. Salazar absorbs this intelligence without visible reaction, though calculating assessment flickers behind his composed exterior. They're destroying evidence and creating potential distractions. Expected behavior for operatives with their training profile. He magnifies the thermal image, showing a bright flare against the cooler island background, presumably La Esperanza detonating according to Elena and Marco's evacuation protocol. Rather than triggering hasty redeployment, Salazar studies the pattern with methodical analysis. Maintain primary search distribution, he instructs after careful consideration. This is a standard diversion technique. Their actual movement will occur perpendicular to the apparent escape vector suggested by this distraction. The dispassionate tactical assessment, precisely anticipating his opponent's methodology, illustrates why Joaquin Salazar has transformed Los Halcones from regional smuggling operation to transnational criminal enterprise during his 12-year leadership. His calculated approach combines strategic patience with ruthless execution once objectives crystallize. Sir, extraction team reports imminent arrival at designated landing zone, announces the communications specialist. Requesting final authorization protocol. Salazar activates a secure communication channel personally. Authorization granted. Implement specialized pursuit parameters as briefed. When he terminates this connection, subtle anticipation registers in his otherwise controlled demeanor. Now we deploy our most effective asset. Victor raises an eyebrow questioningly. You've committed the Phantom to this operation? The reference, clearly significant to senior cartel leadership, prompts murmurs throughout the command center. Salazar acknowledges with a single nod. La Cazadora and her partner represent extraordinary targets requiring extraordinary measures. The Phantom specializes in exactly this type of high-value acquisition. For those familiar with Los Halcones' operational hierarchy, this revelation carries significant weight. The operative code-named Phantom represents the cartel's most elite manhunter, a specialist deployed only for capturing targets of exceptional importance or difficulty. Operational parameters? Victor inquires, recognizing the escalation this represents. Capture preferred, elimination authorized if necessary, Salazar responds. I want La Cazadora alive to understand exactly why her 5 years of peaceful retirement have ended, but I won't risk losing her entirely for the satisfaction of personal confrontation. This pragmatic brutality, prioritizing mission success over personal vendetta despite his emotional investment, exemplifies the calculating efficiency that makes Salazar a uniquely dangerous adversary. Even vengeance operates according to strategic, rather than emotional imperatives. he returns his attention to surveillance displays showing search patterns throughout the archipelago. They believe they're implementing a carefully planned escape protocol, he observes with clinical detachment. In reality, they're moving precisely as our predictive analytics anticipated. The command center continues humming with coordinated activity as specialized teams deploy throughout the operational zone. Unlike typical cartel enforcement actions characterized by overwhelming force and territorial intimidation, this operation unfolds with the methodical precision of a military campaign. Resources carefully allocated, intelligence continuously processed, contingencies systematically addressed. For anyone observing this sophisticated pursuit apparatus, the unavoidable conclusion emerges that Los Halcones, under Joaquin Salazar's leadership, represents something far more dangerous than conventional cartel operations. The organization has evolved into a hybrid entity, combining criminal enterprise with military capability and intelligence tradecraft, a nearly insurmountable adversary for two isolated former operatives regardless of their individual skills. 5 years ago, Elena Cortez took something irreplaceable from me, Salazar remarks, studying her dossier photograph with cold intensity. Now she learns the consequence of that action. No one escapes Los Halcones forever. As night descends over the archipelago, sophisticated tracking systems continue monitoring thermal signatures, movement patterns, and environmental disturbances throughout the island complex. Specialized pursuit teams maintain strategic positions along probable escape vectors. The extraction team prepares to deploy their secret weapon, the mysterious operative designated Phantom. Amid this comprehensive manhunt apparatus, Joaquin Salazar waits with the patience of an apex predator, secure in the inevitability of his quarry's capture. Despite their impressive capabilities, Elena and Marco face an adversary who has spent 5 years preparing specifically for this confrontation. An opponent whose resources, influence, and tactical sophistication exceed anything they encountered during their government service. The personal nature of this pursuit guarantees that capture means something far worse than quick execution. Salazar's vengeance, when finally implemented, will extract maximum suffering before granting death's release. This knowledge transforms their escape attempt from tactical exercise to desperate survival imperative. Within his command center, surrounded by technology and loyal operators, Joaquin Salazar permits himself a rare moment of anticipatory satisfaction. After 5 years of patient investigation, the architect of his brother's death has been located. The hunt has begun in earnest, and Los Halcones never loses prey once the pursuit commences. Moonlight silvers the water's surface as Elena and Marco paddle their specialized inflatable craft through a narrow channel flanked by mangroves. They move in perfect synchronization, each stroke efficient and nearly silent. The distant glow of La Esperanza burning serves its purpose, drawing cartel attention while they implement their actual escape route in the opposite direction. Patrol boat passing 200 meters east, Marco murmurs, his enhanced night vision, monocular revealing what normal sight cannot. Crew scanning shorelines with thermal equipment, Elena adjusts their course slightly, guiding them deeper into a flooded mangrove thicket where overhead vegetation creates natural concealment against aerial observation. Their specialized gear, thermal dampening suits beneath ordinary clothing, reduces their heat signatures to near ambient levels, rendering them virtually invisible to standard thermal imaging systems. Extraction point remains clear, she confirms, after consulting their encrypted GPS unit, 2 kilometers northwest, approaching optimal arrival window. They navigate through increasingly complex waterways, following routes no satellite imagery or standard chart could reveal, passages discovered during years of meticulous exploration conducted under the guise of routine fishing. This intimate knowledge of the archipelago's hidden geography provides their primary advantage against Los Halcones' technological superiority. 40 minutes of careful progress brings them to a small clearing where mangrove forest transitions to more solid ground. Here, partially concealed beneath natural debris and camouflage materials, waits their first emergency cache, a waterproof container secured 3 years earlier as part of their contingency planning. Marco performs a careful perimeter check while Elena retrieves the cache. Inside, they find precisely what they prepared: sealed communications equipment, additional weapons with suppression capabilities, specialized navigation tools, and most importantly, contact protocols for the limited network of allies they maintained. Despite their supposed deaths, convoy approaching from the south, Marco reports, his posture shifting subtly as he processes this new information. Unusual configuration, multiple vessels maintaining formation rather than search pattern distribution. Elena joins him at the observation position, studying the distant lights through specialized optics. That's not standard Cartel protocol, she notes with professional assessment. Those are naval intercept vessels running without identification signals. This development carries significant implications. While they anticipated Los Halcones' assets pursuing them, direct military involvement suggests corruption at institutional levels rather than merely individual bribery. Salazar has compromised naval command structures, Marco concludes, confirming Elena's unspoken analysis. That changes our extraction parameters significantly. Elena considers their options with rapid tactical assessment. Their original extraction plan assumed conventional cartel pursuit, formidable but ultimately predictable. Naval assets introduced different surveillance capabilities, enforcement protocols, and jurisdictional considerations. We activate the secondary network, she decides, retrieving specialized communication equipment from their cache. Official, channels are compromised, but our independent contacts remain viable. The secondary network represents individuals they've cultivated relationships with during their years in the region, people outside official structures who can provide critical assistance without triggering institutional surveillance. Not friends exactly. Their cover identities prevented truly close relationships, but contacts they've carefully positioned for precisely this contingency. Elena activates a specialized communication device that operates on frequencies outside standard monitoring parameters. The encryption systems, military-grade technology they retained from their former operational lives, ensure transmission security even against sophisticated interception attempts. Horizon Protocol, Authentication Whiskey Echo 793, she transmits, using recognition codes established years earlier. Request activation for assets Hummingbird and Driftwood. Response channel Delta. The transmission lasts less than 3 seconds, insufficient duration for conventional direction finding equipment to establish their location. After completing the broadcast, Elena immediately powers down the device to prevent any potential tracking. Nearest safe position for response monitoring? Marco inquires, already scanning their surroundings for defensible locations offering communication access without compromising security. Elena consults their specialized topographic map. Ridgeline overlooking the northern channel. Elevation provides signal reception while maintaining escape vectors in 3 directions. They secure their equipment and move with practiced efficiency through dense vegetation toward the designated position. Despite the urgency, their movement remains disciplined, systematic rather than rushed, preserving energy while minimizing detectable trail signs. Reaching the ridgeline requires 30 minutes of careful ascent through increasingly rocky terrain. The elevated position provides clear sightlines across surrounding waterways, while offering concealment among weather-worn boulders and stunted trees. Marco establishes a defensive perimeter, while Elena prepares their communication equipment. For monitoring the response channel, signal window opens in 12 minutes, she notes, checking their specialized timepiece against predetermined communication protocols. Marco acknowledges with a slight nod while continuing his security assessment. Naval formation has established blocking positions along all major channels. They're implementing a systematic containment strategy rather than active pursuit. This approach, establishing perimeter control instead of direct engagement, suggests professional tactical direction beyond typical cartel operations. Someone with military or intelligence background is coordinating this manhunt, applying methodologies Elena and Marco themselves might have used in their former careers. Salazar's resources have expanded significantly since we've been monitoring Los Halcones, Elena observes. This level of coordination indicates specialized personnel recruitment beyond regional capabilities. Indeed, the operation unfolding around them demonstrates sophistication rarely seen in even the most powerful cartel organizations. Integration of military assets, advanced surveillance technology, and strategic patience rather than overwhelming force. These elements combine to create a man-hunting apparatus potentially more dangerous than anything they faced during official operations. When the designated communication window arrives, Elena activates their receiver using minimum necessary power settings. For several tense minutes, only atmospheric static emerges from the specialized equipment. Then, precisely on schedule, a brief transmission cuts through the background noise. Authentication confirmed. Hummingbird active at coordinates Echo 37. Driftwood standing by on secondary channel. Contingency parameters acknowledged. The message, brief and encoded, confirms their emergency network has activated successfully. 2 critical allies have acknowledged their situation and initiated predetermined assistance protocols. For the first time since the pursuit began, Elena permits herself a moment of cautious optimism. Coordinates indicate Hummingbird is operational at the mainland extraction point we established last year, she translates, already calculating travel times and interception risks. Approximately 20 kilometers from our current position. Marco processes this information against observed pursuit patterns. Naval assets have established primary containment along southern and eastern approaches. Northwestern vector remains under-monitored, consistent with standard perimeter prioritization against southerly escape attempts. This assessment matches Elena's analysis. Military and law enforcement containment strategies typically prioritize vectors toward population centers or established transportation infrastructure. In this case, southern routes toward mainland communities. The northwestern approach, leading initially away from obvious escape infrastructure, would receive lower priority coverage. We utilize the northwestern corridor, then circle to Hummingbird's position once beyond the primary containment perimeter. Elena decides, already plotting the complicated route this will require. Marco nods agreement. Driftwood's availability on secondary channel provides redundancy if primary extraction fails. The cryptic reference to driftwood would mean nothing to anyone intercepting their communications, but both understand this represents their connection to Rodrigo, the former naval intelligence officer whose charter business provides both transportation capabilities and information access across the region. While Elena prepares for their next movement phase, Marco establishes observation of naval patrol patterns using specialized night vision equipment. The systematic movement of intercept vessels confirms their earlier assessment. Standard containment methodology focusing on southern vectors while maintaining lighter coverage across northern approaches. Patrol intervals averaging 12 minutes. Along the northwestern corridor, he reports after completing his analysis, consistent with secondary priority designation. Elena incorporates this intelligence into their movement planning. We'll need to cross 4 observable channels between here and the outer perimeter. 12-minute intervals provide adequate transit windows if we maintain underwater movement through exposed sections. This approach, utilizing specialized breathing equipment to travel beneath the surface through monitored areas, represents standard evasion methodology from their operational backgrounds. Their emergency cache includes precisely the equipment required for such techniques. Primary extraction timeline? Marco asks, already calculating equipment allocations for their approach. Hummingbird typically maintains operational status for 6 hours following activation, Elena replies. Given transmission timestamp, we have approximately 5 hours remaining to reach the mainland coordinate. 5 hours to traverse 20 kilometers of heavily monitored waterways, evade sophisticated surveillance systems, and bypass armed patrol vessels, a formidable challenge even for operators with their specialized training and equipment. Yet, the alternative, capture by Los Halcones, remains unthinkable given Joaquin Salazar's personal involvement in the pursuit. Secondary transmission incoming, Marco alerts, as their communication equipment indicates another broadcast on their designated frequency. The message, even briefer than the first, carries significant implications. Phantom deployed. Extreme caution advised. Elena's expression darkens perceptibly at this warning. Salazar has committed specialized resources beyond standard pursuit assets. The designation Phantom holds specific meaning within intelligence circles monitoring cartel operations, a legendary manhunter whose identity remains unknown, but whose operational successes have built a fearsome reputation. Some reports suggest former Special Forces background. Others indicate intelligence agency training. All agree that targets designated for Phantom's attention rarely escape. Escalation beyond anticipated parameters, Marco acknowledges, immediately, adjusting their tactical approach based on this new information. Standard evasion protocols may prove insufficient. Elena reconsiders their planned route, calculating risk factors against their operational capabilities. We implement countermeasures for specialized pursuit, false trails, thermal deception, acoustic distraction. These techniques, designed to confuse even sophisticated tracking methodologies, require additional time and resource allocation, potentially extending their exposure within the containment zone. Yet the alternative, standard evasion against Phantom's specialized hunting capabilities, offers even lower probability of success. Agreed, Marco confirms, already sorting through their equipment to identify necessary components for these advanced countermeasures. Primary movement initiates in 30 minutes. I'll establish the first deception circuit while you prepare underwater transit equipment. They work with practiced efficiency, leveraging years of operational experience despite their long retirement. Elena prepares specialized breathing apparatus that will allow underwater movement for extended periods without surface indicators. Meanwhile, Marco assembles thermal decoys that will mimic human heat signatures when activated, creating false positives on thermal imaging systems. Northwest Channel shows reduced patrol presence, Elena reports after another scanning cycle. Optimal transit window approaching within 18 minutes. Marco completes final adjustments to their equipment distribution, ensuring essential components remain accessible during underwater movement phases. Ready for primary movement, before departing their elevated position, Elena transmits one final burst communication. Proceeding to extraction. Anticipate arrival within 4 operational cycles. Phantom countermeasures implemented. This transmission, containing no specific coordinates or timing details, provides their extraction contact with sufficient preparation notice without revealing actionable intelligence to potential interceptors. The reference to operational cycles utilizes predetermined time units understood only by their network members. As they prepare to descend toward the Northwestern Channel, Elena performs a final security sweep using specialized optics. The surrounding waters glitter with patrol vessel lights implementing their containment strategy, while occasional aircraft sounds suggest aerial surveillance components supplementing the naval perimeter. Impressive resources committed to this operation, she observes with professional assessment rather than concern. Salazar has prioritized this pursuit beyond standard cartel protocols. Marco secures their remaining equipment with practiced precision. Professional evaluation suggests personal motivation rather than operational necessity, vendetta parameters. This analysis aligns with intelligence they've gathered about Joaquin Salazar during their years monitoring Los Halcones activities from their island sanctuary. The cartel leader's reputation for patient but implacable vengeance against those who harm his organization, particularly anyone connected to his brother's death, suggests this pursuit transcends typical enforcement actions, which means capture ensures extended interrogation rather than immediate elimination. Elena concludes, the implication requiring no elaboration between experienced operators familiar with cartel methodologies. This understanding reinforces their determination as they begin their carefully planned evasion route. Survival now depends entirely on reaching their extraction contact before Salazar's sophisticated man-hunting apparatus, particularly the mysterious operative designated Phantom, can close the narrowing gap between hunters and prey. Moonlight catches briefly on specialized equipment as they disappear into dense vegetation, leaving their observation post as undisturbed as they found it. Behind them, patrol vessels continue their systematic movement patterns, unaware that their quarry has already identified containment weaknesses and implemented countermeasures against even their most sophisticated tracking methodologies. The gathering of allies has provided crucial support for their escape attempt. Whether this network proves sufficient against Los Halcones' unprecedented resource commitment remains the critical question determining their survival through the approaching night. The complication Betrayal Water closes overhead as Elena and Marco submerge beneath the channel surface. Their specialized breathing apparatus, compact rebreather systems, originally designed for covert military insertions, leave no telltale bubbles to mark their passage. Moonlight penetrates only the first few feet of murky water, leaving them navigating primarily by specialized underwater compass and memory. They proceed along the channel bottom, maintaining tactile contact with each other through a simple cord system that allows basic communication without compromising stealth. 20 meters ahead, the beam of a patrol boat sweeps the water's surface, powerful lights probing for any sign of movement. From their submerged position, the light appears as diffuse illumination filtering down through murky depths. Elena signals a holding pattern using their tactile communication system. They become motionless, allowing the patrol vessel to pass directly overhead without detecting their presence. The boat's engines vibrate through the water around them, temporarily disorienting, but ultimately harmless, as the patrol continues its predetermined route. When the vessel moves sufficiently distant, they resume their underwater transit. This methodical approach, alternating movement with strategic pauses to avoid detection, extends their journey significantly but maintains their stealth advantage against superior numbers and technology. After 40 minutes of underwater navigation, they reach a section where the channel widens into a small bay. Here, dense underwater vegetation provides additional concealment as they finally surface in the shadow of overhanging mangroves, minimizing their visible silhouette against the night sky. Northwestern perimeter remains our optimal exit vector, Elena confirms in a whisper barely audible above water sounds. 2 more channels to cross before reaching the outer containment line. Marco scans the shoreline with his night vision monocular, confirming no immediate surveillance. Patrol patterns maintain 12-minute intervals. Predictable sequencing suggests automated coordination rather than adaptive response protocols. This assessment provides useful tactical information. The pursuit operation, while impressive in scale, appears to follow predetermined patterns rather than dynamically adjusting to changing conditions. Such methodical approaches create exploitable weaknesses for experienced operators familiar with perimeter security protocols. They rest briefly, conserving energy while monitoring patrol movements to confirm their observations. The specialized breathing equipment requires reconfiguration between extended underwater sessions, providing necessary opportunity to assess their progress against the containment strategy continuing to unfold around them. Aerial component increasing, Marco notes, tracking distant aircraft sounds with practiced precision. Helicopter movement suggests search pattern expansion rather than targeted approach. Elena calculates implications while preparing their equipment for the next underwater transit. They've likely discovered our false trail by now. Expanded search parameters indicate uncertainty about our actual vector. This represents tactical success for their deception measures. Thermal decoys and deliberately blunted evidence suggesting movement towards southern extraction points. Los Halcones' resources, while substantial, must still prioritize probable escape routes rather than achieving truly comprehensive coverage across the entire archipelago. Next transit window opens in approximately 3 minutes, Marco confirms, after checking patrol timing against his specialized timepiece. Channel width approximately 60 meters at narrowest point. Elena completes final equipment checks. Underwater transit time estimated at 7 minutes, assuming standard navigation complexity. With synchronized precision, they submerge again as the optimal transit window arrives. This channel presents greater challenges: stronger currents, deeper central section, increased underwater obstacles. Yet these same features reduce effective surveillance coverage, as patrol vessels must maintain greater distance from hazardous underwater formations. They navigate by touch and instinct through the darkened underwater environment, maintaining contact through their tactical cord system. Halfway across, Elena detects unusual vibration patterns through the water, multiple engines approaching from different vectors rather than the predictable patrol sequence they've observed previously. She signals immediate holding position. They settle among underwater rocks, minimizing movement while attempting to assess this development. Above them, powerful searchlights sweep water surfaces with significantly greater intensity than routine patrols. The systematic grid pattern suggests coordinated search rather than random patrol activity. Something has changed in the pursuit parameters, perhaps discovery of their previous transit point, or new intelligence affecting search priorities. Either way, this intensified activity directly across their planned route represents significant tactical complication. They remain motionless for nearly 9 minutes as multiple vessels conduct overlapping search patterns overhead. Their rebreather systems function efficiently, but extended stationary submersion creates physiological stress even for operators with their specialized training. Eventually, the search vessels begin expanding their pattern away from the immediate area, creating potential transit opportunity. Elena signals resumption of movement, but with modified route parameters. Deeper central passage utilizing minimal illumination time. This approach increases navigation difficulty, but reduces potential surface detection. Marco acknowledges with practiced coordination, adjusting his movement to maintain security in this revised tactical scenario. When they finally reach the opposite shoreline, emerging carefully among tangled mangrove roots, both recognize the heightened danger represented by this intensified search activity. Standard containment procedures have clearly escalated to active search protocols, suggesting their evasion techniques have triggered response adaptation from whoever coordinates. The pursuit operation search pattern indicates specific intelligence rather than standard perimeter response, Marco assesses, while they reconfigure equipment for land movement across the narrow island, separating them from the final channel before the outer containment. Perimeter Elena concurs with this analysis. Adaptive pursuit methodologies suggest specialized tactical direction, consistent with phantom operational parameters mentioned in our warning transmission. The implied escalation reinforces their urgency as they proceed through dense vegetation toward their next transit point. Moving overland introduces different detection risks: potential thermal signature visibility to aerial surveillance, physical evidence creation through vegetation disturbance, reduced escape options if confronted by pursuit teams. They adopt specialized movement techniques developed for jungle infiltration operations. Careful foot placement, distributed weight transfer, minimal vegetation disturbance. Progress slows significantly, but detection avoidance justifies this tactical compromise. Approaching the island's opposite shore, Marco suddenly freezes, hand signal indicating immediate threat. Elena instantly becomes motionless, senses heightened, as she scans their surroundings for the danger he's detected. Voices carry faintly through the humid night air, Spanish with distinctive northern Mexico accents. Not patrol boat personnel communicating over radio, but actual ground teams on the island itself. Los Halcones has deployed land-based search units to complement their maritime containment strategy. Elena and Marco exchange glances, conveying complete understanding without words required. This development significantly alters risk calculations for their remaining extraction route. Land teams with tracking capabilities present fundamentally different challenges than maritime patrols restricted to vessel-based observation. They adjust, position carefully, moving deeper into concealing vegetation while maintaining sensory awareness of the approaching search team. Through small gaps in foliage, Elena distinguishes 4 operators moving with professional discipline. Not typical cartel enforcers, but specialized personnel with apparent tactical training. 3 carrying standard patrol configuration. Marco whispers, his assessment barely audible even at inches distance. 4th equipped with specialized tracking equipment, thermal and acoustic detection capabilities. This confirms their escalating tactical disadvantage. Standard evasion techniques prove significantly less effective against specialized detection equipment, particularly when employed by operators with apparent professional background. Elena calculates rapidly changing tactical options. Continued. Evasion presents increasing detection probability as search density intensifies. Direct confrontation risks compromising their position through noise or evidence creation. Neither approach offers satisfactory probability metrics for successful extraction. Diversion protocol, she concludes after rapid assessment. Maximum separation vector with rendezvous at final extraction coordinate. Marco processes this decision immediately. Separation represents significant tactical risk, but potentially doubles their evasion success probability against focused pursuit resources. By creating multiple tracking challenges, they force pursuit coordinators to divide limited specialized assets. Acknowledged, he confirms with professional efficiency that belies the personal significance of potential separation. Primary diversion followed by secondary extraction approach. Communication blackout protocol until rendezvous. Elena retrieves a specialized device from their equipment, a compact thermal diversion generator originally designed for special operations teams requiring tactical extraction under hostile surveillance. When activated, this technology creates multiple heat signatures mimicking human movement patterns across a wide area, temporarily overwhelming standard thermal detection systems. Southeast deployment, she determines, indicating the opposite direction from their planned extraction route. 90-second delay activation. I'll proceed northwest, maintaining zero evidence transit protocols. Marco nods understanding. I'll establish secondary diversion 2 minutes after primary activation, then proceed along original extraction vector with minimal delay at final channel crossing. Through specialized optics, Elena observes a solitary figure standing at the boat's bow. Tall, motionless despite the vessel's speed, scanning shorelines with methodical precision, unlike the more casual observation patterns of regular patrol. Impersonal, even at significant distance, the operator's posture communicates unmistakable professional capability. Cold certainty forms in Elena's tactical assessment. Phantom has arrived personally at their operational theater. The specialized manhunter's presence indicates pursuit escalation beyond even their previous calculations, introducing an adversary whose capabilities potentially match or exceed their own, despite their elite operational backgrounds. This development, combined with the compromised extraction point, creates a tactical situation approaching worst-case scenario parameters. Their carefully planned escape route has collapsed through either surveillance penetration or direct betrayal. Specialized pursuit assets now actively hunt across their operational area. Their communication security has been necessarily compromised. To prevent immediate capture, Elena absorbs these complications with the dispassionate calculation that once made her the DEA's most effective tactical commander. The situation has deteriorated severely, but extraction parameters remain theoretically viable through secondary protocols if properly implemented. She adjusts her planned route to account for new surveillance distribution and compromised extraction. Coordinates. The revised approach requires greater risk acceptance, longer underwater transit times, and reduced safety margins, compromises necessitated by rapidly evolving tactical reality. As she prepares to submerge for channel crossing, Elena permits herself one final glance toward the direction Marco would be traveling. No visual confirmation proves possible at this distance, but operational faith, the foundational trust between experienced partners, provides necessary certainty that he received her warning transmission. She enters the water with minimal surface. Disturbance, disappearing beneath dark waters as searchlights sweep the area she occupied moments earlier. Above her, unaware of her presence, Phantom continues methodical scanning of shorelines from the approaching specialized vessel. The complication has transformed their extraction from challenging but viable to severely compromised and marginally achievable. Their separation, initially tactical advantage, now presents significant vulnerability if extraction coordination fails. Yet no better options exist given available intelligence and resource constraints. Elena proceeds underwater with absolute focus, compartmentalizing concern for Marco behind the operational discipline that has repeatedly ensured survival throughout her career. The mission parameters have changed substantially, but the objective remains unchanged: escape, survive, regroup according to established protocols. Whether their carefully cultivated extraction network has been penetrated through surveillance or directly betrayed remains undetermined. Either scenario creates severe tactical disadvantage, requiring immediate adaptation to prevent capture by Los Halcones' unprecedented pursuit operation. In the final confrontation, Elena and Marco reunite at Driftwood's hidden cove, narrowly evading. Phantom, who tracks them relentlessly, using their combined tactical expertise, they lure Salazar's forces into a devastating trap, turning the cartel's own surveillance technology against them. With Rodrigo's help, they escape by sea as explosions illuminate the night sky behind them. Months later, in a small coastal town thousands of miles away, Elena and Marco build another quiet life, now under new identities. They maintain vigilance, knowing Salazar survived but was severely weakened by their escape and the intelligence they transmitted to former agency contacts. The cartel's operations face unprecedented scrutiny as their evidence exposes the corruption network. The hunters became the hunted, and the predators learned too late whose trail they had followed. If you enjoyed this thrilling tale of secret, identities, and survival against impossible odds, hit subscribe so you never miss our next heart-pounding story.